This is part 2 of my Back to the Basics series. In the first video, we installed Home Assistant on a Raspberry Pi 4. In this video, we're going to go a little more in depth, talk about some of the essential add-ons you might want, talk about some integrations, and maybe do a little bit of automation. So let's get started. All right, so let's talk about some essential add-ons that you might want to put into Home Assistant. To get to your add-on section, we're going to go to Supervisor, and this will take us to the add-on store. Right now you can see I don't have any add-ons installed, but clicking on the add-on store, you can see that we have a number of official add-ons, and then we have some Home Assistant community add-ons. These are developed by the community itself and installed or made available through Home Assistant. So I always like to start with a terminal or SSH add-on, because there will be times we may need to get into the server and do some work directly on the command line. Depending on what you do, it could be rare, but other times you may be doing a lot of that kind of work. So I'm going to install terminal and SSH by just clicking on it. And in every one of these add-ons, you're going to see an info section, which is basically this. And then you're going to see documentation that talks about how you install this, how to use it, and various other parts of that. So these are pretty straightforward, most of them. So I'm going to just click on install. And this is going to go ahead and install this terminal and SSH client. Now on a Pi 4, with nothing else running on this, it should be pretty fast to do the installation of the add-ons. You just click and you kind of wait. Once it's installed, you'll have a screen that looks like this. Plus, you'll have a log entry, so we can come over here and kind of look. Now you'll notice that it installed it and it did not start it. There's a number of options here you also want to maybe look at. Start on boot will always start this add-on when the device boots up. Watchdog will restart the add-on if it crashes. I seldom use that because if it's crashing, something's going on. I don't want it to get into some sort of loop and lock up the rest of my system. So I don't turn that on normally. Auto update, I don't do that either because I like to read the change log and make sure that there's not something that's going to break one of my settings or something else I'm doing. So I leave that off. Now these things are completely up to you how you want to do this. These are my personal preferences. Now show in sidebar, this one for the terminal and SSH, I definitely want to do that. And when you click that, you already can see over here that this has been added to the sidebar. So you can just click it right out of here rather than coming into here. All right, so you need to start any add-on that you want to have running, and we'll go ahead and start that. And as we start it, we want to come over to the log tab, and we just kind of want to refresh it and make sure everything is looking good as it starts up. Now it says the SSH port is disabled, so we don't actually have SSH on the server at this point, but we do have terminal. So we can come over here and we can click on terminal, and we can see now that we have a terminal in the Home Assistant. So rather than having SSH or having to get into SSH directly on the server itself or the Raspberry Pi, you can come over to terminal. Using the terminal is going to depend on what you're trying to do. You may need to do some editing of some files directly and stuff like that. And in this case, the terminal becomes handy, and that's why I install it. So I can Control D to exit out of the terminal and go back over to my Supervisor add-on section, and you'll see now that we have the add-ons installed. So that's terminal and SSH. Now if we go back to the add-on store and we look through here, there may be a few other things that you want to add as well. Another popular add-on is the file editor. File editor allows you to edit files directly within your Home Assistant instance without having to open a terminal or something else. It's pretty popular and allows you to do things easily without having to know a lot about the command line. So let's install this one. Just like we did the other add-on, you just click and install, and after it installs, we'll start it up, check the logs, and make sure everything works the way it's supposed to. And you can kind of look through here what it does. It's essentially just a file editor built into your web browser. Makes it super simple to edit files if you need to. Same things occur, or same settings are available here. Watchdog, start on boot, auto update, show in sidebar. I'll go ahead and click the show in sidebar, and you'll see here it adds this file editor link on this side. All right, so it's started up. Let's look at the log. Actually, it's installed. Let's start it now. And then once it's started up, we can look at the log and see what's going on within the log. Make sure there's nothing glaring that's going to be a problem. And now you can see that this is also listening on port 8099. So we should be able to come over here and click on File Editor. And our list of files on our Raspberry Pi should show up here. And right now, you can also do a number of other things within here. You can select the trigger platform. You can do things with entities, conditions, do automation kind of work. Typically what I do is use it just for the file system, and I would come into my config directory, which is the default here, and I would come down to, let's say I wanted to edit my, my configuration.yaml file. And now I have this file where I can just do some simple editing stuff within the file. And you'll notice here, if you type it wrong, you get some information explaining to you that you've done some sort of YAML mistype or typo or whatever. So this is another popular add-on to have. And let's see if there's anything else that we want to do. So if we go to Supervisor again, we'll see that these two are installed. Then we'll go back to the add-on store and see if there's anything else. For now, I think those are the two that are the biggest ones that we want to play with today within the official add-on store. Now you can go through here and just add all kinds of stuff. Keep in mind you're on a Raspberry Pi 4 in this case, so the more stuff you add, the more resources it's going to take, and the potential for, you know, slowing down your system is going to be a thing here. So there's some other things here that I will talk about, maybe not install them on this one. AdGuard Home is very popular. I use this on my production server, and we can click on it and look at it, not install it. But essentially what AdGuard is it's an ad blocking DNS server you can use for your network. This gets a little bit more into the advanced area of things, but it is something that I use, and I use it I use it for all of my DNS resolution within my home network. Blocks all my ads. You can use it for blocking malware, block adult sites. You can do a lot of different settings for that. So I enjoy that one. I also have, let me see what else we have here. And you'll notice here, this one, folding at home. If you see a red bar on your add-on, that means it's not available for your system. So in this case, this folding at home is not available to install on a Raspberry Pi because of the Raspberry Pi architecture. So we don't use that one. I also use Grafana. I use InfluxDB. I use a whole bunch of other things that are on here. Portainer, because I'm in a Dockerized environment on my production server. And then just a bunch of other stuff here. So those are the two that'll get us started just as basic add-ons. Now, a couple things to note about add-ons. If you go to Supervisor and you look at this, occasionally make sure you're checking, especially if you don't have auto updates turned on, make sure you're checking these every once in a while, because there will be updates for these from time to time. And you'll want to make sure you update to the latest version. Also, making sure you check the changelog that you don't break anything during the update. Also in this Supervisor section, if there is an update for Home Assistant itself, this will show up above all the add-ons. A very important point about updating Home Assistant on a production system is that you check for breaking changes. And when you go to Home Assistant and we look for updates, and here's the latest release notes for the latest update, they will go through and they'll explain all the changes that are in the update, and they'll explain everything that could potentially be broken. So they call it a breaking changes section. These are things here that if you're running any of these type of items or entities or integrations or add-ons or whatever, that you need to pay attention to these. So if you do an upgrade from one version to this version where they have the breaking changes, it's going to break whatever's listed here. So make sure when you're upgrading your add-ons, when you're upgrading Home Assistant Core or anything like that, that you pay attention to the breaking changes. Is it best to be on the latest version of Home Assistant? Absolutely. Is it best to be on the latest version of Home Assistant without checking for changes and how they might affect your production system? No. So always check that first. Another important point here is to make sure that you are making snapshots. So what you can do with snapshots, and I have a video on this, which I will link above here, is you need to make sure that you're doing some sort of backups on a regular basis. And what a snapshot is basically a backup. And so I'll take you through a quick little backup that we do here, and I'll call this demo backup for lack of a better term. I'm going to take a full snapshot. I always do a full snapshot. If you do a partial snapshot, it will allow you to select your add-ons and your folders and anything else that you want here. For me, since my backups are automated, I always do a full snapshot because it doesn't affect me. It runs at 2 o'clock in the morning or whenever, and I get everything. So if something happens to my production server, I have a backup of everything. But I'll do a full snapshot, and if you're going to store this somewhere publicly, add a password to it. I'll just add a password, and then I can click on Create. And the snapshot for me on my production system takes a while. It might take 30 minutes to an hour because I'm backing up everything on my server. Here you can see it already backed up what we had here in just a minute. Well, matter of seconds, right? So here's my demo backup. If for some reason you have a problem with your system, you need to be able to get to this backup. So it's important that you download the snapshot and store it somewhere off of your production server. And then you can use this later on to import and restore your configuration if you were to lose that for some reason. So backups are extremely important. I think that backing up using an automated tool like the Dropbox backup, the Google backup, the Samba backup, which is what I'm using internally, to an off-device or off-site place is very important. Now my NAS, my Synology NAS, that's where I back up my Home Assistant to, and that's also backed up to an off-site location. I talk about in my videos a lot, a level of risk you're willing to accept. Whatever you do with your backups, you need to make sure you can get to them if something catastrophic were to happen. So just keep that in mind when you're building your backups. All right, so we've talked about add-ons, a couple important add-ons. We talked about making backups or snapshots of your system. And then if we want to just get a quick overall look at our system health, this is something we can do in the system section. And it tells you what supervisor version you're running. It tells you what channel you're on, stable versus beta. You can share diagnostics with the team, the Home Assistant team, so they can build a better Home Assistant system, ecosystem. Host names, and in the newest versions of Home Assistant, you now have the ability to change your IP address and your host name directly from the supervisor. And then of course, what OS you're running and what deployment you're running here. You can also restart supervisor, you can reboot the host system, or you can shut down the host system. And you can also get a list of hardware on your system. So these are all the devices that are on my system here. And then of course, this kind of is important here, use space versus RAM versus CPU and core CPU, supervisor CPU. So that's nice. It breaks it down into your core and your supervisor and then how much space you're using. So on a Raspberry Pi 4, the way I just explained it in my previous video, I am using the built-in SSD card. There are a couple of things you need to be aware of when you're doing that, and I didn't explain it in the other video. You need to make sure that you are backing up. We talked about that. Because the SSDs are, sorry, not the SSD, the micro SD cards, they tend to fail over time. And they will fail especially if power gets pulled in the middle of a write process, or they'll get corrupted or something else will happen. So it's important you have backups. Also in this section, we talk about logs. We have all kinds of logs we can look at. And if it's green, it's good. If it's yellow or red, if it's yellow, you probably want to take a look and see what's going on. If it's red, something is not functioning the way it should. All right, so I know this video is getting long. I just want to kind of go over some of these simple things that you need to know about. Now, once you have all this installed, you've got a couple add-ons installed. What are some of the things that you can do with Home Assistant? And what you're going to see me do now is I'm going to jump from my development system, which is this one, my Raspberry Pi, over to my production system. And the concepts are exactly the same. They're just, my production system has my Z-Wave devices, and all my Z-Wave devices, all my lights and all my door locks and things are on my Z-Wave device, or on my Z-Wave network. That is not easily transferable over to a development system or easily duplicated on a development system. So I want to make sure that I'm able to show you things with lighting and stuff like that on a working system. The concepts are the same. Let's jump over to my production system. And let's just pretend like this is the Raspberry Pi 4. So I want to do what most people do when they start playing with Home Assistant. I want to automate something. And I'm going to do a very simple automation for you. I'm going to go into the side panel here, click on Configuration, and I'm going to go into Automations here. I'm going to add a new automation. And it's this little blue button over here on the bottom right. And you can either use a blueprint, and I have a whole video on blueprints, so take a look at that. Blueprints are a new concept in version 2020 and above of Home Assistant that allows you to reuse basically templates. A blueprint's a template of some sort of automation that you can change the entities on and have it do different things to the same thing to different entities. So I'm going to start with an empty automation here. And let's assume that you have installed some sort of lighting, or you have an entity within Home Assistant that is a light bulb or something like that. Either it presents itself as a Z-Wave device, or it presents itself as one of those smart light bulbs or whatever. So I'm just going to say turn light on. let's just say turn light on at sunset. And this is going to be single mode. And my trigger is going to be the sun. And we can see that here. You have a number of different items where you can trigger against. And I'm going to use the sun as a trigger device. And it's going to be sunset. And my offset is going to be, if you turn it on right at sunset, it's going to be too dark. So you want to put a little bit of an offset on it. So in order to put a little bit of an offset, I'm going to set it back to, let's say I want it to come on 30 minutes before the sun sets. So I'll put a negative 00:30. So this means that 30 minutes, back 30 minutes, minus 30 minutes past or before this event, sunset, I'm going to do something. And that action, in my case, is going to be a call service. And we can see the types of services by just clicking the drop down here and see all of the stuff that you can do. A lot of types of services you can call within Home Assistant to make something happen. And so in our case, we're going to do a switch turn on service call. And a switch turn on service call, in my case, the reason I'm saying switch when I'm talking about a light, they're not actual lights, although they control a light, and that's typically what they're used for. So I'm going to turn on a switch. If you have those smart light bulbs, they may present themselves as a light. So switch turn on, and then I'm going to look for an entity. Now all of these things in here that it shows as entities are items that Home Assistant knows about. It's a switch, it's a light, it's a alarm panel, it could be a weather sensor. As you build out your network, you're going to need to know what is what within your network, your Z-Wave network, your Zigbee network, your house, your Wi-Fi, whatever. Because you're going to have to find these things later on. Naming them correctly at the beginning will be helpful for you as well. So I know that specifically I'm looking for a light called Playroom. So I see here that I have a switch called Playroom Light. And OZW is just an extension I gave to it telling me that's on my Open Z-Wave Beta Z-Wave network. So I'm going to use this switch as part of my, or as my target for my switch turn on call service. And there's no additional data needed to do anything with it. If we go back through this, and this is a simple example of how you can do something. And it also highlights how simple it can be to do something. Your Home Assistant automation setup can be just as advanced as you want it to be. You can get into some really detailed stuff, and later on we can talk about maybe some of that. That gets in again into the more advanced or intermediate area. All right, so I'm going to save this now, and we should now see an automation called Turn Light On at Sunset. And if I click on Automations, it should be here. All right, so here it is, Turn Light On at Sunset. So what this is going to do, and you can also see here that it's never been triggered. And you can look at all your automations in the list and see the last time they were triggered. But this, since it's already past sunset here, will not execute until sunset tomorrow. But leaving this on now means that every time it becomes 30 minutes before sunset, and if you have your in the previous video you saw where we set our auto detected our location. If you have your location set correctly, then it will automatically adjust that time throughout the year. So it will always turn on the light 30 minutes before sunset based on the location you have configured in your Home Assistant instance. So if you have the wrong part of, if you're located in the US and you have it set for Europe, the light's going to come on in the middle of the night. So make sure that you have your location set up within Home Assistant correctly. And you can do that on the map. All right, so we have this thing turned on. Now, if you want to stop this from running, any of these automations, you just click on the little toggle button here, and now it's turned off and it won't run. All right, so recapping again, what we've done now is we've talked about the add-ons. So we go back over here and look at our add-ons. You can go to the add-on store, and you can add any kind of add-on that you want that's available. And next time we'll talk about the Home Assistant Community Store. There are hundreds of different things you can do in the Home Assistant Community Store, in addition to everything else here. And that'll be for the next video. We talked about making snapshots. We talked about going through your system and looking at the logs, looking at different settings, controlling your host system, and then looking at some of the system metrics. And then we did a simple automation. Again, this is just basic stuff. So if you're watching this and you're more advanced, I appreciate you watching. We're going to continue with this series and do a few other things. Next time I want to talk about HACS, and I want to talk about doing integrations. And integrations are a whole nother section where you go into this section here, and you can add integrations from hundreds of different devices that work with Home Assistant. And let me tell you, this is what makes Home Assistant such an amazing platform. I haven't run across anything necessarily that I haven't been able to integrate into Home Assistant. Now, the caveat to that, of course, is that some of them take a little more work to get working than others, but there's always work going on to add new items to Home Assistant as they come out. And so Home Assistant continues to mature. Things just show up. And a matter of fact, as you notice in the previous video, these things right here, this Google stuff, my printer, my NAS, and then this was added, I guess, by the install, and this Raspberry Pi power supply, those were all things that it found already. And so when you add things to your network, sometimes it'll just pop up and say, here's a new item that is it discovered. And then you just click on configure for the things that you want or ignore it. So if I clicked on Google Cast, I could click on this right here, and it knows that it's found this thing right here. And you can set the area. And now this device has been discovered on my network, and it is now ready to be used. That, again, is the beauty of Home Assistant. If it finds it, it's usually a few clicks just to get it up and running, and you're ready to go. So now I can reference this. I can make an automation to have that thing talk to me or whatever, and it's just going to work just fine. So I know this video gets kind of long, but there's a lot of stuff to to unpack in the basic part of using Home Assistant. I hope it's helpful, and I hope that that you're able to start playing with this and get into some of the fun that is Home Assistant, home automation. Remember, some of this does require a little bit more work as you're playing with Home Assistant. There's such a huge community of people out there willing to help. I'm one of them. I make these videos for you to help you with Home Assistant. And there's Home Assistant Discord server, Home Assistant forums, just a lot of helpful people out there that are ready to help you. So if this is your first start into this journey, enjoy it, have fun with it, don't stress over it too much. All right, so I've probably blabbed enough, talked enough. Leave me comments down below, questions you have. If you have specific basic items you want me to talk about in my videos in this series, let me know. I'm kind of going through things that I think are helpful to new Home Assistant users, but I could be missing the mark on some of this, so just let me know. Hit that like button if you like the video. Subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything to subscribe, but it helps my channel to grow and helps me continue to make these videos. So we will see you on the next video where we're going to talk about HACS, and we will talk about some integrations a little bit in more detail. And take care. This is part 2 of my Back to the Basics series for Home Assistant install. This is part 2 of my Back to the Basics series. In my first video, This is part 2 of my Back to the Basics series. In my first video, I installed Home Assistant on a Raspberry Pi 4. Oh, you thought making a video was just turn on the camera and talk? That's going on the blooper reel.